Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I'm seeing a lot of folks joining right now. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. A lot of folks are still coming into the meeting, so we'll be getting started in just about 2 minutes. We'll plan to start at about 2 minutes after the hour. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. A lot of folks are still joining the meeting currently, so we'll stand by for just 2 more minutes and we'll get started once we start seeing the joins slow down. Dan, what are we up to right now on attendees?
Looks like we're a little over 120 right now, Fred.
Okay. Is it still going up a lot?
Yeah, it's still going up.
Well, let's go ahead and get started with the introduction. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. This is a webinar that's jointly hosted between Stack Energy Consulting and SYSO. Today's webinar discussion topic will be New York's 6 gigawatt energy storage goal. Our panelists today are Eric Worsley, Principal at Stack Energy Consulting, and Aaron Jenkins, Senior Sales Engineer at SYSO. Dan Curran, Senior Vice President of Energy Markets at SYSO, will be leading and hosting our Q&A session. And then myself, Ferdinand Rapant, Senior Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at SYSO, will be hosting today's webinar. Just a little public service announcement before we get started. This webinar is recorded. All lines should be muted. This presentation and its contents are the intellectual property of SYSO Inc. They're proprietary and confidential in nature and should not be shared with others who are not the intended recipient. This content is for the purpose of non-specific, generic, and gratuitous advice and do not include or intend to include any direct guidance on any specific product. SYSO Inc. and Stack Energy Consulting disclaim any and all liability for use of such presentation or application of its contents. Now that we're through that, let's talk through our agenda today. We've got some really exciting stuff to talk about. There's obviously big market dynamics that are shifting and happening in New York. So today's webinar discussion will be focused on those dynamics. We'll be discussing an overview of energy storage in New York. In that, we'll include sections on retail storage and bulk storage. Then we'll round out the discussion with lessons learned from New York battery energy storage system operations. We'll have a Q&A session that's live hosted by Dan Curran at the end. It's important to note, if you haven't seen the Microsoft form yet, it should be in your email inbox in an email from info@syso.com. You can also see the Microsoft form link in the chat window in this webinar. Brian, if you can repost that link again, just to make sure that it's kind of at the top of the box. Please feel free to add multiple questions, as many questions as you want to add. We've got some great questions already from the attendees that came in before the webinar started. We'll do our best to cover all the questions that are submitted during the webinar, but with our time limitation today, we'll probably be following up with you but we will follow up with every question that's asked, either via email or phone or by setting up a follow-on meeting. So that being said, we're going to shift into some introductions of our companies and presenters. So the first company that's participating today is Stack Energy Consulting. Stack Energy Consulting provides regulatory advocacy and engagement services, monetization strategies, and actionable intelligence. You might contact Stack Energy Consulting when you're looking to develop or execute regulatory action plans to overcome barriers and drive growth, to identify new and existing opportunities across markets to inform your go-to-market strategy, or gain insights into complex market and regulatory developments, to guide investment strategy and avoid surprises. A quick overview of SYSO. SYSO is a market operations services provider with over 2.5 gigawatts of battery energy storage, solar, and battery storage solar hybrid facilities under management. These are over 200 assets across 15 states. We have assets in every US-based ISO market. SYSO focuses on arbitrage simulation, asset registration and market registration services, asset operations, optimization and scheduling, and reporting and settlement. Our presenters today will be Alex Worsley, principal at Stack Energy Consulting. Alex has a master's degree in engineering from Cornell. Alex participates in a number of boards in market serving focus and has previous roles in the energy industry at Enelix and Boris Renewables. Our other presenter today is Aaron Jenkins, Senior Sales Engineer at SYSO. Aaron is a licensed professional engineer with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. Aaron has deep experience in the clean energy industry with over 20 years of experience in various roles. With that, we're going to hand the discussion over to Alex to get us kicked off. Alex?
Hey, can you hear me and see me? I'm assuming if I don't hear anything,
I think that's good, Alex.
Really appreciate the introduction. And I'm really excited to be talking to you all today. It's a really exciting time to be developing storage assets in New York. So I think this is a perfect opportunity and perfect time to be talking about this today. So as we cover the agenda, I'm going to start off kind of talking at a high level about what's going on with storage in New York. And then we'll dive into the weeds on both the retail and bulk side of things, speaking to NYSERDA's implementation plans that have been recently filed. So really why we're here today is that over the summer, the New York Public Service Commission, or the PSC, took a massive step in advancing the energy storage industry in New York. They passed the second round of the storage roadmap order, which kind of expands upon some of the early successes that New York has had in developing energy storage projects. So starting in 2018, New York took the first steps in kind of establishing an energy storage market in the state, and by taking legislative and regulatory steps, passed the energy storage roadmap order, which established a 1.5 gigawatt goal by 2030 of energy storage in the state. This summer in June, the PSC passed, it kind of expanded upon that initial order and revised that goal to 6 gigawatts. Which they were proposing to implement across a variety of different market segments, including bulk, retail, and residential. So within that, the bulk procurements, which when we say bulk, I'm talking about transmission connected projects. They are establishing a 3 gigawatt target on the retail side. So that's project connected to the distribution system, both in front of the meter and behind the meter. They established an additional 1.5 gigawatts of additional incentives. And then they established for the first time a residential program across the entire state for an additional 200 megawatts. So before we dive into each of these individual market segments, so I'll be speaking to both the retail and the bulk side of things today, we thought that it was important to flag 2 additional pieces of the storage puzzle in New York that we think is applicable to kind of all of the market segments. So Fred, if you could turn to the next slide. The first part of that first part of that puzzle is fire safety. New York hasn't had the perfect track record when it comes to fire safety in the past couple of years. And in the last year specifically, New York has seen a couple of pretty large battery storage fires. There were three pretty significant events that happened in the summer of 2023, which caused the state and state regulators to take additional steps to kind of ensure that any additional procurements or additional development of energy storage within the state is adhering to the highest safety standards. So over the past year, the state has convened a multi-agency task force to revise their fire code to reflect the best practices for energy storage resources. Those recommendations kind of have made it to the Department of State this fall and are being considered for implementation in 2025. So we thought that was an important thing to include here, just to keep that in the back of your mind when you're talking about development in New York State, that New York has and will continue to have a pretty significant focus on ensuring that those developments are safe and are up to the highest standards. And New York City, for example, already has some of the strictest fire code standards kind of in the country right now. And those standards have developers had to work within those standards when they're thinking about their projects. For example, they require only specific types of equipment to be able to be developed. And while the industry has worked really closely with state regulators on ensuring that these fire codes kind of meet everybody's needs, there are still some outstanding points of concern, particularly around the requirement of a fire mitigation personnel. So this is having somebody available to be on site within 4 hours and be able to respond within 15 minutes. So that's still one point of concern, I think, outstanding with those fire recommendations. But I think that these are great steps in terms of ameliorating some of the concerns that we've seen across the state regarding the fires. That being said, there are still some municipalities in New York with moratoria on energy storage development, kind of in response to some of the concerns regarding fire safety concerns. The second piece of the puzzle, if you flip to the next slide, is on reliability and environmental justice. So like we've seen across the country, reliability, while it's always been core to kind of grid operators' mission, it's having a moment kind of right now in the spotlight. Reserve margins kind of across the country are tightening, and that's the same, and that's true for New York as well. And given kind of the distribution of population and load in New York, there's been a specific attention towards downstate New York. So this is talking about New York City area. So that's kind of the lower Westchester, Long Island, New York City area. Reserve margins have been tight there, and we expect them to continue to be tight. So kind of generally, there's been a focus on tight system conditions there. And, given that there's a large population centers where the grid is tight, there's also been a focus from the state on making sure that development in these regions to address those needs are done so equitably and taking into consideration environmental justice. So a significant portion of all the funding that's coming from the state, kind of coming from the mandates from the laws which created these programs, are ensuring that a significant portion of the funding is going towards projects that benefit disadvantaged communities by reducing reliance on high emitting peaking plants and ensuring that those developments are done equitably and with environmental justice concerns kind of with top of mind. So with those two kind of high level overview of kind of the energy storage landscape in New York, we'll now dive into the retail programs. And then after that, I'll cover the bulk programs. So Fred, if you could flip to the next 2 slides. So starting in with the retail, and once again, defining retail as assets that are connected to the distribution system, both behind and front of the meter. I'm going to spend a little less time on the retail program as part of my talk today, because really what NYSERDA is proposed to do is essentially re-up some of these existing programs that they established in 2018 and have allocated additional funding towards them to continue kind of the success that they've seen in developing this market segment previously. So as I said, kind of at the top, they've allocated an additional 1.5 gigawatts of incentives towards this program through a megawatt block structure. So the megawatt block incentive structure is the same type of incentive structure that was available to projects previously, but there will be new funding blocks available under this new roadmap order. And when I say a megawatt block, I am talking about a walk-up standard offer fixed incentive of $1 per kW amount that projects can enroll in until that megawatt block is fully subscribed. So projects, if you had a project in a specific region that was looking to participate, they would be able to enroll in the block until that block is subscribed. And then if there's still funding available, NYSERDA will open up additional blocks. So the roadmap order opened up those additional blocks in June. In this fall, NYSERDA filed their implementation plan, which establishes kind of the additional details regarding what those blocks are going to look like. So they've proposed to open up 3 new blocks, one in New York City, one in Con Edison Westchester's territory, and one in rest of state. In terms of the megawatt allocations to those 3 blocks, you'll see kind of keeping in mind that overarching view that there's been an attention towards downstate, that NYSERDA has proposed that a significant portion of that funding of these new blocks is going to be allocated towards that New York City zone and the Con Edison Westchester zone. So of the 1,500 megawatts overall, they're proposing about 50% of that to go to New York City and 10% of it to go to the Con Ed Westchester territory. In addition to opening up the new blocks, the other 2, I think, important notes of changes that the order this summer made to the program is first, that it increased the cap size of this program from 15 megawatt hours to 20 megawatt hours per project. So this allows 5 megawatt 4-hour resources to fully take advantage of the retail incentives. The second change that they made is that they are opening up a new retail block incentive program called the Inclusive Storage Incentive, or the ISI, for behind-the-meter projects located at critical facilities in disadvantaged communities. So this is a new block funding that NYSERDA has opened specifically for projects that are able to help disadvantaged communities. Again, kind of keeping in mind that overall the state has a focus on targeting projects which are benefiting their environmental justice goals. And they've proposed to allocate at least 60 megawatts towards this program as well. So Fred, if you switch to the next slide, here you'll see a table which kind of dives into the details of exactly what NYSERDA was proposing for those blocks. And when I say a zone and then a block size and the megawatt hours, you can see all of that kind of outlined on the table on the right. And I guess to start off, I'll draw your attention to the incentive rates in the second to last column. You'll note that they, if you have been following along with the previous retail incentive programs, you'll see that the New York City block, they'll be opening up a block 6, and that incentive rate is the same as it was that they just opened up last summer for block 5 at 125 kilowatt per hours. For the Con Edison Westchester block, so they'll be opening up the second block there. They propose a slightly lower incentive value at 125, and for rest of state, they've actually increased the incentive rate to $175 per kW. The second thing I'll draw your attention to is the block capacity. So that's the third column over. And you'll see, on the previous slide, I spoke to kind of their overarching allocations of the megawatt quantities from the retail incentive into the different areas of the grid. Here you'll see what NYSERDA is proposing for their first round of blocks. So the first block incentive that they've opened up at these incentive rates under this new funding. So for New York City and Con Edison Westchester, they're opening up a pretty significant portion of what they assume is going to be the overall allocation towards these 2 block zones. So New York City, they're in that first block zone, they're opening up about 40%. And for Con Edison Westchester, they're opening up about 2/3. So kind of in terms of expectations, the NYSERDA is hoping that they're going to get a lot of projects to join into these initial blocks, which will help them meet their 2030 goal. If you turn to the next slide, so you could talk a little bit about timing, because I think that ties in nicely to the what I was just talking about regarding the block sizes and the availability of future blocks. So right now, NYSERDA is in a period of receiving public feedback on on their implementation plan, which outlines kind of the parameters that I just covered on the last 2 slides. And we're expecting that by the end of the year that the regulatory process will have concluded, and that NYSERDA will be able to open up these first blocks in early 2025. The expectation is that there will be a significant amount of projects and a significant amount of interest in these first blocks, and these first blocks may fill up quickly. And then after these first blocks fill up quickly, depending on the availability of funding, they will open up additional blocks, the timing of which and the size of which and the incentive level of which will be determined after those initial blocks are fully subscribed. So we don't know quite when or how big those blocks will be, but there will be additional blocks for all of those zones, and we will have to wait to see what those blocks will be until these initial blocks fill up, though we're expecting these initial blocks to fill up relatively quickly. So overall, that's kind of the update on what's going on with the retail incentive. Overall, they're just re-upping kind of their existing program. There's more funding available for projects kind of participating in these retail incentives, and there will be additional opportunities kind of in the future to participate under these programs. Before we turn it over to Bulk, we did also want to cover an additional program opportunity available to retail projects that is kind of coming online alongside the retail incentives. So this is the statewide Solar for All program. So Fred, if you could turn to the next slide. So this is a new program offering by NYSERDA, which offers a new offtake model in New York, which is building really upon their community distributed generation model. So I kind of think of, well, to start off, I'll say that statewide Solar for All is somewhat of a misnomer for the name of this program. It is named that way because it's kind of expanding upon existing CDG models and expanding on the expanded Solar for All model. However, this program is available to standalone storage projects. So the statewide solar part of it we should really say statewide solar and storage for all. So what this model is that it's a streamlined process for a community project model, but it removes the customer acquisition process from the developer and puts that process into the utility's hands. The way it works is that a project would enroll in the program, and it's a standard offer model where the utility would then pay the developer a fixed percentage of the meter credit value that project would be generating, and the utility would be handling the customer kind of pooling and distribution of those bill of credits to eligible customers. The project would be receiving a monetary credit for the meter value that it's providing, but wouldn't have to deal with any of the administration of signing up customers. The utility would be the one that is kind of creating that eligible customer pool and would be allocating a portion of the meter credit value to the customers, and it would be taking a portion of the meter credit value as an administrative fee. These fees would be fixed, so they're not negotiable, but it would be a program that a program could enroll in. So right now that percentage value is being proposed at 94% of the meter credit value would go back to the project, while 5% would go to the eligible customers, and then their utilities would be taking a 1% management fee from the meter credit value for the projects that are participating in this program. All right, so that covers the updates on retail programs in New York. So now we're going to be turning to the bulk stuff, and this is the really exciting stuff. This is the new stuff that this is the first time that these programs are going to be available in New York State, and I I think what has attracted a lot of interest and excitement about developing storage in New York State in the coming years. So overall, as part of the order, as well as creating these retail incentives, the PSC also established a process by which NYSERDA will be holding annual procurements for bulk storage over the next 3 years for 3 gigawatts of bulk energy storage assets. While these procurements will look very similar to NYSERDA procurements for renewables, so right now NYSERDA holds these kind of annual procurements for renewable assets and offshore wind assets, resulting in REC and OREC contracts. These contracts for energy storage projects will be for a new product called an index storage credit. I'm going to be digging into exactly what index storage credit is and how that sort of contract works in the next couple of slides. But before I do, I'm going to cover kind of just overarching what the procurements look like, and then I'll dig into kind of the mechanics of how those types of contracts work. So you can see at the top here is a schedule of NYSERDA's anticipated schedule for releasing procurement. So anticipating that the first round of these new contract opportunities will be available in 2025, and then having subsequent opportunities in 2026 and 2027. Our expectation is that NYSERDA will be procuring roughly equal quantities in each of these 3 solicitations, so about a gigawatt per solicitation. However, NYSERDA has indicated that they might try to procure more than that 1 gigawatt in the first procurement, thinking that there might be project attrition kind of in over the next couple of years, which, if they still want to meet their 2030 goals, they would still have time then to kind of increase later stage procurements to be able to continue to achieve their goals. In terms of the contract terms, the PSC was very specific about what those would look like, and proposed that the terms would be at most 15 years for lithium-ion technologies and 25 years for non-lithium-ion technologies. In the way that they're evaluating these contracts, NYSERDA will be looking at both price and non-price factors in their evaluations of bids in these solicitations. I will be speaking kind of in my discussion of kind of how these contracts work. We'll be speaking to both of these factors. So we'll first speak to kind of how the pricing works, and then we'll speak to some of the non-price evaluation criteria that NYSERDA is going to be using. So we can turn to the next slide. So what do I mean when I say an index storage credit? So essentially, in its most simplest form, an index storage credit is essentially a contract for differences. It's a make-whole payment between the expected market revenues and a strike price, which is supposed to be reflective of what an energy storage project would need to meet its revenue requirements. So you can see on the chart on the right here kind of how a project would participate under this type of contract model. So I'll point out, I guess, starting at the bottom of this chart here, that a project would participate directly in the markets, and they would keep any market revenues that they earn from that participation. So under this kind of model, a project is still participating in the wholesale markets and receiving revenues from the wholesale markets, even though they have a contract with NYSERDA. On the top half of the figure, in addition to that wholesale market revenues, NYSERDA will pay the project to make up the gap between expected market revenues and what the storage project bid into the solicitation, which would be their strike price. You'll notice that I keep saying expected market revenues when I'm talking about kind of the difference between the strike price and the reference price. When I'm referring to that reference price, I keep saying expected market revenues. And that's because NYSERDA doesn't actually look at what you're doing in the market, but they come up with an expectation of what they assume a project will be doing in the market, and they will pay you the difference between that expectation and the strike price that you bid. This is to incentivize optimal market performance. So they're really trying not to tamper with any market signals, and are trying to incentivize resources to participate in an optimal manner. This is why having partners like SYSO is critical, because you don't want to underperform compared to the reference price, because then kind of the payment that you would receive from NYSERDA plus the market revenues that you would receive wouldn't actually hit your strike price. However, kind of on the flip side of that, if you overperform compared to the reference price, there is an opportunity for your project to actually earn kind of overall or receive an overall payout above the strike price if you were able to outperform the reference price. I know that was a little confusing, so I think on the next slide, if we go to the next slide, it might actually be a simpler to see or helpful to see this by looking at the exact formulation for the ISC price and kind of how that interacts with the two different components that I was just talking about. So the ISC price is the price that NYSERDA will pay projects for each ISC, each index storage credit that they produce. And I'll get into ISC generation on the next slide. And you can see that on the chart on the right, where kind of that ISC price is the gap between the strike price and the reference price, kind of highlighted in green on the right. And you can see also that if the reference price does exceed the strike price, it'd likely be a pretty rare scenario. The developer would need to pay NYSERDA back. So in terms of kind of the breaking down each of those individual components for kind of the difference that we're talking about here. So the strike price is supposed to reflect the revenue requirement for the project. So, projects with lower revenue requirements would likely be more competitive here. And then the reference price is supposed to be an approximation of the wholesale market revenues that a project is expected to receive under a reasonable commercial operation strategy. So the way that NYSERDA is thinking about this is that the project would be participating in energy arbitrage and capacity. So if we move to the next slide, kind of a couple of additional details on index storage credit production. The last slide covered how NYSERDA would be formulating the price. This is how NYSERDA would be formulating the quantity. Index storage credit is representative of 1 megawatt hour of storage capacity that is operational on a given day. I'll point out that this is not the same as a REC, which is dependent on the megawatt hours that are actually produced. An index storage credit is independent of the storage asset's operation, actual performance in the market. They are generated simply by being operational and available on the day for dispatch. So every day that a project is operational available, they will generate credits, and on non-operational days, they will not generate credits. So for a 100 megawatt 4-hour resource, they have the opportunity to produce 400 credits on an operational day. So that was kind of on the pricing side of things. If we turn now to kind of some of those non-pricing factors that I was talking about, if we could go to the next slide. In terms of how NYSERDA is thinking about these solicitations, they are including, to start off with, they're starting off with 2 large carve-outs, and then I'll talk on the next slide to some of the specific criteria that they will be evaluating all projects on. But those 2 carve-outs are on duration and for geographic considerations. So on the duration side of things, the Commission has recognized there being a need to develop the long-duration storage market in New York State. Kind of tying back in with those reliability concerns that I talked about at the top, New York sees value in incentivizing long-duration storages kind of in the long run and want to make sure that the system is set up now to be able to incentivize those resources. So the way that they are proposed to do that is that they are setting a 20% carve out in each of the bulk procurements for resources that are able to operate longer than 8 hours. So this implies about a 200 megawatt carve out in each of the 1 gigawatt solicitations. And they're proposing kind of to separate each of those asset classes within those solicitations. So they will kind of all 8-hour resources will be competing, or 8+ hour resources will be competing against 8+ hour resources, and all 4+ resources will be competing against 4+ resources. NYSERDA is not proposing to procure resources less than 4 hours. This is primarily due to the risk that they see for procuring resources of duration of like 2 hours. There's a significant amount of wholesale market volatility and expectations that kind of wholesale market revenues for assets of shorter durations will decrease significantly in the coming years. So in terms of what NYSERDA's expectation for payout, they're not willing to take on the risk of resources that they are expecting to have very little wholesale market value kind of in the long term. So they've kind of capped their procurements at resources greater than 4 hours. In terms of geographic carve-outs, and that's, again, to meet those kind of overarching needs for both reliability and environmental justice, the Commission has ordered that at least 35% of the total procurements kind of across all 3 solicitations be for projects located in NYSO zones G through K. So I don't know if you remember from the chart that I showed maybe on slide 2 of my presentation, those are those downstate zones, kind of the Westchester, New York City, and Long Island area. Of that 35%, 30%, of the 35%, 30% of the total procurement will be located in Zone J, and at least 5% of that would be located in zones G through I and or K. So they've kind of broken out that 35% into more specifics across the zones in that downstate region. NYSERDA has stated that it intends to meet or exceed those geographic targets, and they will be doing so kind of both through the non-price factors as well as through a kind of ex post analysis of whether or not their procurements have met these targets. In terms of how they're kind of encouraging resources to help them meet these geographic carve-outs, I think it's helpful to talk through kind of the different non-price factors that NYSERDA is going to be considering in these solicitations. So if you go to the next slide, overall, NYSERDA is thinking about using 3 buckets of non-economic factors, including project maturity, social and economic benefits, and electricity system value. You'll see here that they have weighted project maturity of these 3 categories pretty highly. They're looking for pretty mature projects to be participating in these solicitations, though then again, there are 3 years of procurement. So even if you're not able to participate in 25, projects can still make significant progress up to 2027. And then the second 2 categories are really trying to get at awarding points to projects that are able to help them meet their geographic targets. So kind of with these non-price factors, NYSERDA is going to be will have a minimum threshold that projects will have to be able to be eligible. They've already established some of those, like regarding size and ability, like not having received incentives from any other kind of NYSERDA funding source. But then they'll also award bonus points for exceeding those thresholds. So the further along a project is in terms of its development, or the more benefit that it provides to being able to meet reliability needs or benefiting an environmental justice community, the more points it would receive. So there are points on the table kind of beyond just the price factors, kind of thinking about that formula that I showed on a couple slides ago. There are ways that projects could win points kind of in this solicitation for being located in advantageous places. So if you can move to the last slide, this is the last slide that I have on the implementation, on the bulk solicitations, and really like the retail program, just kind of covering a timeline. So right now, like the retail solicitation, there's a public comment period open. That's going to be open until early 2025. And then after that, we're expecting NYSERDA to release the first draft of the solicitation for the first round of procurements for these resources. This is where we're going to see some additional details, kind of really get down into the nitty-gritty. We should expect to see a sample term sheet regarding these procurements kind of in that early 2025 timeframe, setting us up for the first round of procurements in the mid-2025 timeframe, so that the first procurement round can roll through the 2025. And then I think the only other thing I'll note before I wrap up with one last item on bulk procurements is that kind of as we think about this timeline and about these bulk solicitations, is that NYSO is undergoing a transition in the way that they study bulk level projects. In compliance with FERC Order 2023. They're currently undergoing that process. The first transitional cluster process kicked off earlier this year, and they're kind of kicking off the first phase of that process now. And we expect to see some results kind of in line with the timeline for solicitation that I just outlined for the first round of procurement. So if you turn to the last slide, is the last slide that I have on the bulk procurements. And really like the retail program, kind of just like throwing in additional elements beyond the NYSERDA incentives for additional things that I think are worth considering when we're thinking about these projects more holistically within the NYSO markets. So like a lot of other regions, energy storage projects in New York are now subject to a new capacity accreditation methodology. So this is the amount of capacity that a resource is able to sell into the capacity market. NYSO has established these capacity accreditation factors, so values that they're multiplying against the installed capacity, the nameplate capacity of the resource, to kind of derate the amount of capacity that these resources are able to offer into the market, kind of reflecting the energy limitations or the energy availability limitations of these resources. So we're expecting these resources to see some derate in the New York markets. Last year, the table on the right is the CAF values for 2024, and you'll see for a 4-hour resource, for example, that these resources were only able to offer about 2/3 of their capacity into the capacity market. There are potential market changes that might help mitigate some of these effects. For example, NYSO is considering using a 2-hour resource as a 2-hour energy storage resource as the reference technology in setting the demand curve, which might help offset some of these CAF derates. However, in the short term, we're not expecting to see those effects to be significant. So overall, that is kind of a big picture of what bulk incentives are available to energy storage projects in New York. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron on the SYSO team to talk through SYSO's experience participating with these types of assets in the New York markets.
Thank you, Alex. Fantastic stuff and a difficult act to follow up. So I hope that everybody was able to get some very insightful information about developments there in the New York market. From here, we're going to take a look at how SYSO works with our customers in the various New York markets and programs and how we assist them. This will involve some shameless plugs, so I do hope you'll bear with me. Next slide, please. So overall, how SYSO supports our clients in New York is multifaceted. We provide a full suite of services to all of our customers, depending on the market in which they're participating. So for any renewable asset, be that storage or solar or those that are combined, and certainly SYSO is kind of a leader in management and operation of those solar and storage hybrid facilities. Those can be a bit finicky, but we are quite good at them. We have a very deep bench of experience on those. So if you are participating in the New York ISO market, the wholesale market, we can provide you with that market participant. So really being that gateway that gets you into that market, allows you access to it. Much like a stockbroker, we provide you that access to the wholesale market, installing that real-time telemetry and the dispatch instructions, bi-directional communications necessary with the market and energy exchange. We do that via our 24/7 network operations center that is manned and staffed here in the US around the clock. And we have our electronic communication and integration with your site, along with actual people there checking in every hour as needed on your facility and monitoring for those alarms, sending schedules, issuing dispatch commands. Along with that network operations center, we provide that asset optimization and monitoring. And so that's really a suite of services where we are using our machine language, our AI, and our room full of doctorates and highly intelligent persons to analyze these markets, analyze the overall markets, analyze your load zone, and doing that forecasting. Now, we're not the long-term forecast people. We are very short-term. Next 2 days is really how we live. The next 48 hours, we're operating your asset today. We're predicting where the market's going to be tomorrow and positioning your asset best for that, generating those bid curves, taking the awards and shaping the operation of your facility from there. We are, of course, looking at the full mix of revenues available from wholesale energy to ancillary and capacity, looking to maximize, protect, and optimize all of those for you to ensure that you're getting the best, deriving the best revenues possible from the market. Along with that is all of the administrative services that we provide, the registration of your asset, ensuring that it complies with the market, that it meets the necessary needs and requirements of the market, and right through to settlement and providing you with the reporting necessary to digest all of that information. As a product of all of our operation in these markets, not just New York ISO, but around the country, we have developed a tremendous amount of data that comes from actual operation of these assets in the market. So beyond being an academic or a theoretical exercise, we have a tremendous amount of experience and data from that allows us to develop modeling capabilities that many of our customers find. In those modeling capabilities, we can help you to determine what revenue you can actually expect to derive from a given market for a given asset design. So we're not design engineers. We're not going to design your ground grid or specify your inverters, so on and so forth. But we do provide some very valuable advisement to the design. For instance, you have a certain set of land and an interconnection. You know you can put X amount of solar on it. You want to add batteries to it. You don't know if you need a small, medium, or large. So with our modeling capabilities, we can model out that asset, run it through its paces in a variety of configurations, and help to arrive at the most cost-effective asset design for you. Moving beyond the wholesale market, we have the VDER and DLM markets. Those are a bit like walled gardens within New York ISO. So they're a little bit simplified. They're geared at distribution level generation and storage assets. But we do provide a valuable suite of services for those as well. Again, starting with our 24/7 network operations center to ensure that your facility is operating at its prime, online and ready to go. We provide that asset optimization and monitoring and the NICA peak forecasting. So if you're contemplating a standalone battery in the VDER market, one of the things that you're certainly aware of and perhaps a bit concerned about is the ICAP 3 configuration, where all of your capacity payments are figured on the one coincident peak hour, system peak hour of the year. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. That is certainly a key service that we provide there. And moving beyond even VDER looks at incorporation or cross cooperation with DLM or even LSRV within VDER. If we could go to the next slide, please, Fred. So at our core, what we seek to do is constructing what I like to call the origami crane. So the multi-dimensional figure there in the center, ranging from purple to yellow, is a bit of an abstraction to show in perhaps a three-dimensional shape how batteries tend to optimize within the market. So there is, in general, and depending on the complexity of the market, this would be more representative of a typical wholesale market. But usually there is a location there where we can minimize turns on the battery, maximize revenue of the asset. So we all know that batteries incur degradation as they're utilized. That means there is a specific CapEx cost associated with using the battery. So we want to maintain the health of that battery as long as we can, as best we can, while earning the greatest amount of value. We can see that there are some pseudo peaks there. It's easy to turn the battery many, many times, perhaps loading up heavily into ancillaries, trying to earn those revenues, but the cost, the longer term cost can eat you up. So our systems and our productivity, our operations are focused on finding that location where we have the best balance of the maximum revenue with the minimum cost. The inputs into that include not only the wholesale energy prices and forecasting where that's going to be, but also customer inputs as well. So we are not prescriptive in our services. We do not tell our customers how their assets must be operated. We take that into consideration, what the guardrails are, what the objectives are, what the returns that they're seeking, what warranty requirements they need to protect, and ensuring that we're meeting all of those and developing the prime solution for that. Next slide, please. Okay, as we turn down into the VDER program, we can see that there are 4 batteries, 3 primary revenue streams. And I'm focusing here a little bit on batteries because we are restricted to the ICAP 3 version 4 batteries, which does introduce a little bit of a complexity. It's an area that, in particular, SYSO is able to add value. So for batteries operating within VDER, again, that walled garden of value distributed energy resources, there are 3 main revenue streams. One is that DRV, demand reduction value, and that's going to be typically your primary driver. Next, after that is that ICAP, and then lastly, a bit of arbitrage because we are operating on day-ahead price values within the VDER program. There is also locational system relief value, LSRV. Most LSRV has been claimed at this time. There are a few small pockets around the state. Many of those would generally be considered to be inaccessible. But if you have managed to score those, certainly you want to be able to protect those along with your other assets there, your other income revenue streams. In that capacity value, for those standalone batteries, as we mentioned earlier, all of the marbles come down to that one coincident peak per year. And so if we can flip to the next slide, we'll take a little bit closer look at that. It can be tempted to go it alone in VDER, and you're certainly welcome to, though I think that you will find that as you get into it, there are quite a few valuable services that an entity such as SYSO can provide. So you might say, well, NICA provides a forecast of when the peak hour might occur. So why can't I just operate off of that? When we take an examination of those hours, we can see these 2 charts here. So on the left, we can see that the hours are becoming less peaky. So instead of a broad or a sharp pyramid type of point, what we're beginning to see is a flattening of that curve. And it's becoming more broad, more shield-like. So within that shield, you can have various pseudo peaks within there. So the ability of NICO to predict those peaks is decreasing, and the bandwidth across those peaks is also changing as well. So for instance, the last year, the difference between top hour and second hour was, I believe, 46 megawatts. So 46 megawatts, frankly, across a system such as NISO is trivial. And being able to predict that and determine when that pseudo peak or the real peak is going to occur is where the forecasting abilities and the experience of an entity such as SYSO really provides tremendous value for our customers. Next slide, please. In our peak hour forecasting, we can see the accuracy with which we have determined that over the last 6 years. Now, we do have an asterisk on 2024. It's not 100% known when that peak hour has yet occurred for 2024. We are here in mid-November. We can be confident that it has already occurred for the year, but settlements can take a while with demand response add backs and so on and so forth until we know that peak. We can see that over the last 6 years, we have ranged from 2 to 9 days where we have called the possibility of a peak, and we have ranged from 8 to 36 hours where that peak may have occurred, where we would be deploying assets on behalf of our customers to ensure that they capture that. Some years are a little bit easier. 2023 was notable for that, but certainly 2024 was more difficult. It is our belief, our intuition, that it's going to become increasingly difficult over time, and is going to require that operators of VDER level assets are going to need input from forecasters such as SYSO to be able to meet those. Next slide, please. Okay, moving from VDER, there is some interest in DLM, the dynamic load management, and that is also a program that SYSO is adept at. For most of our customers, we advise that they examine their asset for VDER, ensure that it's going to pencil for at least VDER, and then place a bid for DLM if they're interested to replace the missing monies as well as the additional payment that they would like to see and see if they can win. These are based on bilateral transactions, contracts with the utility. Con Ed is not the only one. There are others around the state, but certainly most well known in the Con Ed territory. Term DLM typically does not pencil for most people. When they look at DLM, they're going to look at auto DLM. It does come with some technical requirements that requires a market operator such as SYSO to be able to help meet the demands of the system. So in the auto DLM, You can cross-participate in VETR, but you do have to give some things up. First of those is DRV. Simply cannot access the DRV portion of VETR while in DLM. There is some ability to maintain, or at least a possibility to capture, some of the ICAP value of VETR along with the LBMP. In the auto DLM, the trickier part is that your resource is at the behest of the utility. So based on the local network conditions and the peaks there, or emergency events, your asset can be dispatched with with as little as 10 minutes for that zone. So having an operations center that is live with your asset, ready to receive that signal and dispatch within 10 minutes is very critical for DLM. Again, a service that can be provided by SYSO to you. The penalties are significant, but the reward can be fairly generous as well, with performance payments ranging from $100 to up to $1,000 per megawatt hour. Next slide, please. So in the co-optimizing between VETR and DLM, one of the key things that I want to draw your attention to is that there is a baseline in DLM. So when you are dispatched, your baseline comes into effect to measure your performance within DLM. So due to that reason, if you are firing your asset every day during the summer to try to capture your DRV and then are triggered for a DLM event, you're going to be in arrears. Your baseline is going to indicate that you've not performed as required. And this is one of the keys that cuts out the DRV eligibility for co-optimizing between VETR and DLM. So I'm running on a bit long. We do have a number of questions. So let's move forward to the Q&A portion here. I'll hand it back to you, Fred.
Yeah, thanks so much, AJ and Alex. Just an incredible job presenting and walking through a really changing and shifting and dynamic market for us in New York. So now let's give it to Dan Curran, Senior Vice President from SYSO of Energy Markets. I'm just looking at the clock, and I think it's really important that we end on time. We have 4 minutes left. So Dan, there's probably 2-3 minutes for questions. It's important to note, keep submitting questions. We will follow up with every question that gets asked. So, just keep them coming in, regardless of whether we can cover them during this time or not. We will definitely follow up with you. So Dan, do you want to maybe pick your favorite 2 questions?
Yeah, absolutely, Fred. I think we'll probably have time for maybe 2 questions. So Alex, I'll start with you. So first question we have here, how developed does a project need to be in order to qualify for the index storage credit?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a question that I get asked all the time. So NYSERDA will set specific project maturity requirements in each of the solicitations. However, they did not do so within the implementation plan. So the information that we have available right now, they have not specified exactly what the project maturity requirements are, but they will do so kind of in that early 2025 timeframe for the 2025 solicitation, and they may modify that for future solicitations as well. So there will be kind of on a solicitation by solicitation basis. However, kind of as I covered on one of my slides, the further along a project is, the more points it will kind of receive under that project maturity non-price criteria evaluation portion of what NYSERDA is going to be looking at for these projects. So the further along a project is, the more likely it is going to get to be selected, though we don't know exactly what that kind of minimum threshold is going to be yet, though we should know in early 2025.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. So next question, we might only have time for 1 or 2 more. Aaron, question on VETR. What happens if a project misses that annual peak hour that you had mentioned?
Well, there's a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. So in that alt ICAP 3 requirement, which again is required for standalone VESs, if you are not online and discharging during that peak hour, then you will miss 12 months of capacity payments. So your capacity tag is set in arrears. It's set in the retrospect on the peak hour. So assume you have a 5 megawatt battery and it was operating at 5 megawatts during that peak hour. Your tag is now 5 megawatts. Within that walled garden of VETR, beginning the next summer, the monthly spot auction price for capacity in your zone will be determined via auction, and then your asset will automatically receive that revenue. So 5 megawatts times the June spot auction value for capacity, and then July, and then August and September, so on and so forth for 12 months until the next year. So if you miss an ICAP, if you miss that peak hour, you will miss 12 months of capacity payments.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. So I have got a very long list of questions here in front of me. I think, unfortunately, we are out of time. So, Fred, I'll hand it back over to you so we can wrap up on time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dan, and Alex and AJ again. Thank you so much for the just absolute expert input that you've had on this call. So, just quick public service announcement. SYSO is ready to help. Stack is ready to help. Please reach out. We'll follow up with you as people that participated in the webinar. We'll also distribute this this presentation or video after the discussion. We'll also follow up on anyone that asked questions. Please don't wait for us, though. If you have a project that you need help with, if you need help with policy support, please reach out to Stack Energy Consulting. Please reach out to SYSO, both of us, any of us, and we'll help you get in connection with the right folks. That's it for today. It looks like we're going to end on time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And again, thank you to our presenters and to Dan for moderating the Q&A. Have a great day, everyone.